morning, sports fans, and welcome to the 9th episode of Red Flag. As usual, we have the recap. We're going to talk about the trade deadline and what that means going forward. Also going to give you a fantasy preview going forward, and another segment of Start or Sit. Let's go. Okay, so the first game that I want to talk about is the Houston versus Miami game. Of course, Miami being triumphant against an anemic effort from the Houston Texans, 44-26. Everything seemed to come with relative ease to the Miami Dolphins. Lamar Miller had like 236 yards from scrimmage, including one touchdown in the air, one on the ground. Wow. Ryan Tannehill posted a perfect 158.3 QBR with 4 touchdowns, 282 yards. And, of course, with the quarterback doing that, the wealth was spread to his favorite receivers, Jarvis Landry, Rashard Matthews. On the other side of the things, Houston really didn't have much going. Had a lot of garbage time stats by Brian Hoyer, so if he was a plug-and-play, kudos to you. Another storyline that I'm not so psyched to tell you about, Arian Foster, yet again, out for the season, torn Achilles. What does that mean? It means you drop him. You've got to rely on a running back by committee from the Houston Texans, Alfred Blue, Chris Polk, Jonathan Grimes. I don't trust any one of them, and neither should you. And Alfred Blue looks like he's going to be the lead back, but, I mean, what does that mean? He's had his chance in previous games, and he never really seems to produce outside of maybe one game where I think he had 128 yards. With that said, look to your Houston receivers, Hopkins, Nate Washington. Now, Nate Washington, with the injury to Arian Foster, should receive more targets. I mean, seeing that Arian Foster, being the running back of Houston, was also their second leading receiver. So expect Nate Washington's production to ramp up. Other than that from Houston, it's another year. It's time to give up, time to pack it in. I think they need to hit the draft for a quarterback, hit the draft for a running back, because yes, I believe Arian Foster has played his last down as a Houston Texan. So next up, you guessed it, Jameis Winston versus Kirk Cousins. Not quite as bad a game as it sounds. 31-30. Washington Redskins had their biggest fourth quarter comeback of all time, franchise history. A lot of numbers were thrown around. Let's get into it. Kirk Cousins had 317 yards, 3 touchdowns, also chipped in 15 yards, and a rush touchdown to boot. Jordan Reed, finally back from injury. My favorite person to talk about. 11 receptions, 72 yards, 2 touchdowns. Welcome back, Jordan Reed. There's no run game to speak of, I'm sorry. Alfred Morris, Matt Jones, Chris Thompson. I don't know who any of those guys are, so we're not going to mention them. Other side of things, we got Jameis Winston. Had a decent fantasy game. 297 yards, 2 touchdowns in the air, one of which going to Mike Evans, who hauled in 8 receptions, 164 yards. Doug Martin continues to trod for that contract, 136 yards on the ground, 3 receptions, 35 yards. It's really encouraging to see these teams starting to put up numbers. I mean, albeit they played against each other, neither of which has such a great defense, but it gives the quarterbacks a rhythm, allows them to start to build a rapport with one of the receivers, one of their running backs. So I really like all the players I mentioned, especially Jordan Reed. Kirk Cousins is finally shaping into a decent NFL quarterback. Love Mike Evans, especially with Vincent Jackson, Lewis Murphy going down. Mike Evans might jump into wide receiver 1 territory. Got to start Doug Martin if he's on your team. Okay, next up, we've got the Oakland Raiders versus the San Diego Chargers, 37-29. Now, this game was a case of a rout turned into garbage time treasure. Derek Carr threw for 289 yards, 3 touchdowns, one of which going to the young stud, Amari Cooper, 5 receptions, 133 yards. Michael Crabtree, 6 receptions, 63 yards, a touchdown. And Latavius Murray, 85 yards on the ground and 1 touchdown. With Oakland, it's starting to become a case of the usual suspects. You know what you're going to get from these players. On the other side, Phillip Rivers had an abysmal first half against a pretty decent Oakland Raiders defense. But in garbage time, produced some pretty nice numbers. 336 yards in the air, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks. The ball was spread around very much. Wealth was spread everywhere. Keenan Allen, 9 receptions, 89 yards. Ladarius Green, 4 receptions, 45 yards, 1 touchdown. Might be a sneaky start with Antonio Gates out for another week. Danny Woodhead, 26 yards on the ground, but 11 receptions, 75 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns. Brandon Oliver, 35 yards on the ground, but 6 receptions, 39 yards. Where's Melvin Gordon? I don't know. Okay, so we've got the divisional matchup. The New York Giants versus the Dallas Cowboys. This game was the Dallas Cowboys to lose, and in true Cowboys fashion, they did just that. I expected the Dallas receivers to feel a little bit of the love from a Matt Castle who's not quite as hesitant as a Brandon Wheaton when throwing the ball. They enjoyed some yardage. Terrence Williams, 4 receptions, 70 yards. Jason Witten, 6 receptions, 73 yards. But the true beneficiary from this game was Darren McFadden, who benefited from a Joseph Randle going down with an oblique injury. 152 yards on the ground, a touchdown, 2 receptions for 10 yards, and now the starting running back for the Dallas Cowboys. Congratulations, Darren McFadden. Matt Castle threw up some numbers in the air, but only had a nice back corner touchdown to Devin Street to go along with 3 picks. The winners really just won this game. I mean, Eli had a pretty pedestrian game, 170 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. Not a great fantasy day. Odell Beckham had 4 receptions, 35 yards. Ruben Randle, 2 for 68. The only receiver that had any type of relevant day, at least from a fantasy perspective, was Dwayne Harris, and not because he caught many balls, only 2 for 43 yards, but he had a 100-yard touchdown return when Dallas tied the game 20-20 to get back in it, and the return really deflated the efforts of the Dallas Cowboys. And, out of nowhere, this running back by the name of Darkwa rushes for 48 yards and a touchdown for the New York Giants, which now means that the Giant backfield is a running back by committee with 4 running backs. Do I trust any one of them? No, I do not. Don't trust any Giant running backs from this point on. So we've got Landry Jones' first career start, and it ends with an L. Kansas City versus Pittsburgh, 23-13, Kansas City. Alex Smith had a decent day, 251 yards in the air, 1 touchdown. In the absence of a Jeremy Maclin, Chris Conley came out of nowhere, 6 receptions, 63 yards, 1 touchdown. Travis Kelce continues to troll fantasy owners. Really, it's not Travis Kelce's fault. It's really, I blame Andy Reid. I blame Alex Smith. 5 receptions, 73 yards. We all know he has the capabilities to get near Gronk status, but the offense isn't so tailored to that. So we're forced to be content with the 12 points that he gives us. Charkandrick West surprised critics from last week, trotting for 110 yards, 1 touchdown, caught 2 balls for 19 yards as well. So maybe he is a good replacement for Jamal Charles. On the other side of things, Landry Jones had a pretty bad day. 209 yards in the air, only 1 touchdown to 3 turnovers, 2 of which being picks and 1 fumble lost. Le'Veon Bell continues to be an every week running back 121 yards on the ground, 4 receptions for 16 yards. Antonio Brown finally got things going for all you who are suffering under the regime of Michael Vick. 6 receptions, 124 yards. And Martavis Bryant continues to find the end zone. 3 receptions, 45 yards, and a touchdown to boot. Come back soon, Big Ben. The word is he's going to start next week against Cincinnati. So this means great things for all your Pittsburgh skill set players going forward. Okay, so yet again, I didn't get my upset, but I got pretty darn close again. New England versus the New York Jets, 30-23. Tom Brady continues to troll the league. 335 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns, 15 rushing yards, and 1 rushing touchdown. Greatest quarterback ever? Probably. Had another Gronk spike, 11 receptions, 108 yards. Danny Amendola, remember last episode I said he was a good waiver wire pickup for this week? Yeah. 8 receptions, 86 yards, 1 touchdown. You're welcome. And Julian Edelman enjoyed his stay on Revis Island, only racking up 5 receptions for 54 yards. No run game to speak of. Dion Lewis was out nursing a strained abdomen, and LeGarrette Blount might as well have been out, only racking up -3 yards. So, on the other side, Ryan Fitzpatrick continues to impress me. 295 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 29 yards on the ground. I'm impressed with Ryan Fitzpatrick and what he's been able to do in this New York Jets offense. Brandon Marshall had a pretty decent day. 4 receptions, 67 yards. Eric Decker continues to be Fitzpatrick's second favorite target. 6 receptions, 94 yards. And Chris Ivory salvaged his fantasy day, only getting 47 yards on the ground, but catching 2 receptions for 21 yards and a touchdown. I think the Jets have what it takes to enter wild card territory, because we all know the Jets are not going to catch the Patriots in their quest to go undefeated. Do I like Amendola going forward? With Brandon LaFell coming back, I'm not so sure that Amendola gets as many targets as he's been getting in recent weeks, so monitor that situation. Everyone else, give them the nod. So the Sunday night action, Carolina versus the Philadelphia Eagles, 27-16. This really was an ugly game that was dominated by the defense of the Carolina Panthers. Cam Newton had a pretty okay day. 197 yards in the air, 1 touchdown, and another touchdown on the ground, coupled with 3 interceptions. Jonathan Stewart racked up another 100-yard game, 125 yards on the ground. And Greg Olsen had an okay day, not a great day. This is pretty much his floor. 3 receptions, 65 yards. Sam Bradford was abysmal, only threw for 205 yards, no touchdowns, 1 pick. The only person of fantasy relevance in this game was Ryan Matthews, who had 97 rush yards and a touchdown, coupled with 3 receptions for 24 yards. DeMarco had 65 yards on the ground but couldn't find the end zone. Zach Ertz had 5 receptions for 63 yards. I guess that's the best Philadelphia option going forward, but like I said, there's so many of them that not any one of them is worth a start. So what does this mean going forward? Philadelphia, I would only trust their running backs because they're the only ones that seem to produce on a weekly basis. Cam Newton, every week starter. Jonathan Stewart turning into an every week starter, racking up many 100-yard games. And with a team that has really one reliable receiver in Greg Olsen, Greg Olsen is an every week start. Monday night action. Arizona versus Baltimore. Arizona being triumphant, 26-18. Carson Palmer had a good game. 275 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns, no mistakes. Chris Johnson continues to surprise the fantasy world, having a resurgent year, 122 yards on the ground and a touchdown. John Brown, this kid, next Wes Welker, just of the ilk of the 5'8", 170-pound soaking wet receivers. 4 receptions, 65 yards, and a touchdown. Starting to become Carson Palmer's favorite target. I'm thinking it's John Brown, Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Floyd. Take that for what it is. Speaking of Fitzgerald, he only had 3 receptions for 39 yards. Got outshined by Michael Floyd. Shout out to Ryan Guillory. Michael Floyd, 3 receptions, 59 yards, 1 touchdown. The Baltimore offense continues to struggle pretty much because there's only 2 weapons, Justin Forsett, Steve Smith. Forsett having a touchdown, not very many yards on the ground, only 36. Steve Smith, 5 receptions, 78 yards, didn't find the end zone. Joe Flacco only threw 252 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Man, it's time to pack it in Baltimore. I expect Baltimore's running backs to, with Forsett, it's kind of hard. I mean, they had a draft pick in Buck Allen, and I expect them to start ramping up his carries. Because, I mean, at this point in the season where you know you're not going any further, you might as well see what you have on your roster. And I expect Forsett's carries to start to dwindle. Maybe even Steve Smith, seeing that, I mean, I don't know, he's adamant that this is his last year, but we see that he's playing at such a high level that, I mean, being on a 1-16 for what? So, don't really trust anything in Baltimore going forward. Mark your calendars, November 3rd, trade deadline. The last time that you can overhaul, make a few tweaks, jumble up your roster. So, with that being said, I think that it's a good thing to have depth, but too much depth is kind of unnecessary and could possibly hurt you in the long run. So, with that being said, I have 4 running back ones on my team. I have Dion Lewis, I have Devontae Freeman, I have Darren McFadden, I have Frank Gore. Frank Gore may be a running back too, but we're really splitting hairs at that point. I can only play 2, possibly 3 of them at any given time. So one of them has to be tradable because I can upgrade my wide receiver position at that point. I have 2 tight end ones. I have Travis Kelce, I have Jordan Reed. I can only play 1 or 2 of them at any given time, which would mean I'd have to sit one of my running backs. Figure out your weakness before the trade deadline and try to bolster it. My weakness, receiver. I have a slew of rookie receivers. They're producing, but I mean, I'm walking on pins and needles come Sunday because I'm not completely sold. They don't have this long, illustrious history of 100 reception, 1,000-yard seasons behind them. So at any given time, they could turn back into a rookie. I have a Stephon Diggs. I have Tyler Lockett. I have Rashard Matthews. Not a rookie, but a relative unknown. I have Amari Cooper, another rookie. I have Jamison Crowder, a rookie. My running backs have been getting me through these weeks. And some great waiver wire additions with Stephon Diggs, with Rashard Matthews, have gotten me to the point where I am in the season. But I would love some security at receiver. So with 4 running back ones, I should be able to trade for a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1. So What I'm trying to say is try to use your depth to your advantage before the trade deadlines happen, because by November 3rd, your rosters are pretty much locked with the exceptions of waivers. So tweak those rosters as much as you can before November 3rd. Alright guys, time for the fantasy outlook. And let's start with the Thursday night game. New England versus Miami, 36-7. Didn't expect this type of route, but I did expect New England to be triumphant. Miami was knocked back down to earth. Dan Campbell experienced his first loss as the interim head coach of the Miami Dolphins. Tom Brady continues to be immaculate. 352 yards in the air, 4 touchdowns, damn near perfect game. Julian Edelman, monster game. 7 receptions, 82 yards, 2 touchdowns. Gronk, monster game, 1 Gronk spike, 6 receptions, 113 yards. And waiver wire pickup week 1. Dion Lewis, 19 yards on the ground, but 93 yards in the air on 6 receptions, 1 of which being a touchdown. On the other side, Ryan Tannehill salvaged his day by going over the 300-yard mark, which means bonuses in certain leagues. So he had that going for him, but not much else. 2 picks, no touchdowns. Lamar Miller salvaged his fantasy day with 1 rushing touchdown on only 15 yards, 5 receptions for 19 yards. Jarvis Landry had a decent outing, 6 receptions, 71 yards, didn't find the end zone. And Rashard Matthews had similar numbers, 7 receptions, 62 yards, didn't find the end zone. I think the Miami Dolphins just ran into a juggernaut in the New England Patriots and should pick up their play against Baltimore next week. So start your Lamar Miller, start Ryan Tannehill, Jarvis Landry, Rashard Matthews. Do I have to tell you to start any of your Patriots? I don't think at this point I have to tell you. They're undefeated. Start all your Patriots, no matter who they play. So the next game I want to talk about, Minnesota versus the Chicago Bears. So I think Minnesota has enough defense up front to stop Matt Forte on the ground, which, of course, forces Jay Cutler to throw. I think Alshon Jeffrey, Martellus Bennett, and, of course, Matt Forte in the passing game should benefit. Chicago does have a suspect secondary, so I expect Stephon Diggs to feast on this Chicago defense. I think Adrian Peterson picks it up. He's been a little nicked up in weeks past, but against Chicago's defense, I expect Adrian Peterson to go over the century mark. Anybody else I should mention? I don't think so. I don't think Teddy Bridgewater has a great game. If you need him for a plug-and-play, he might be a perfect pick now that he has a reliable wide receiver 1 in Stephon Diggs. I think Chicago shocks everyone and takes this one, though, especially with all their weapons back on the offensive end. Okay, next up we've got Dallas Cowboys versus the Seattle Seahawks. In this game, on the Cowboys side, I think Darren McFadden picks up where he left off last week. Seattle has given up some pretty big games to running backs, especially ones that can catch the ball out of the backfield, and we all know that that was what Darren McFadden was sent to the Dallas Cowboys to do. I think that Seattle gets to Matt Castle and gets to Matt Castle very often, but I think with the return of a Dez Bryant, it opens up the passing game just a little bit. I mean, you can force some throws into Dez and he can turn that into gold. Even with a Richard Sherman covering him, I think that Dez has a pretty productive week. I expect a lot of bonehead plays by Russell Wilson, as we've seen in the past. A couple of picks, probably throws for 300 yards, a touchdown or 2, and some rushing yards here or there. But I expect with Greg Hardy rushing him that he's going to be forced into some pretty compromising positions. And he's going to be sacked a lot. Who to start? Got to start Dez Bryant on his week 1. Go ahead and start up Jason Witten. Not sure if I like Terrence Williams with Dez Bryant back. Maybe Williams gets some single coverage with Dez getting more attention, so he's kind of boom or bust. Love Darren McFadden. Not crazy about Matt Castle. Seattle, start Marshawn Lynch, always. Start Russell Wilson if you have to. Start Jimmy Graham. I expect Jimmy Graham to put up some pretty decent numbers in this game. And I like him. Go ahead and start Tyler Lockett. Even if he just gets you some return yardage, a couple of receptions, I think he's worth the nod as a wide receiver 3. Okay, so next up we've got the New York Jets versus the Oakland Raiders. Two pretty decent defenses, two good run-stopping defenses. One great pass defense, one not so great. I expect the usual suspects to be of fantasy relevance when it comes to the Oakland Raiders. Your Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree, Latavius Murray, and Derek Carr. Somebody's got to be on Revis Island. If it's Amari Cooper, I still expect him to produce. I've seen Amari Cooper go up against the best cornerbacks. And I mean, of course, he's facing the best, number one, in Darrelle Revis. But he's up to the challenge. I think if Derek Carr gives Amari a chance, he will not regret it. So I'm going to start Amari this weekend. On the other side, your usual suspects as far as the Jets are concerned: Brandon Marshall, Eric Decker, Chris Ivory. I expect Ivory's production to slip a little bit. One, because he's nicked up. Two, because the Raiders have a decent run-stopping defense. Not really sure about who wins this one. I can see an Oakland upset, but I can see the Jets taking this one as well because of experience. Oakland's a fairly young team, quarterback by a fairly young quarterback. So I'm going to roll with Oakland. Divisional matchup, guys. Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Cincinnati Bengals. It is time for the Bengals to come back down to earth. L number 1. The return of Big Ben Roethlisberger should give Pittsburgh the lift it needs to beat the Cincinnati Bengals. We get our quarterback back. Antonio Brown's production will soar. Martavius Bryant's production will increase. Le'Veon Bell will be catching balls out the backfield and doing what he does on the ground. Cincinnati often torches Pittsburgh with A.J. Green, so I expect him to do some damage, but I think that comes at the cost of a Tyler Eifert. So, who to start? Martavis Bryant, Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, Ben Roethlisberger. On Cincy's side, I don't like Jeremy Hill. I do like Giovanni Bernard. Start Gio. Start AJ. Start Eifert because of his red zone prowess. I guess you can start Andy Dalton as well, but I expect him to see a lot of turf going up against that Pittsburgh front seven. Got the hometown bias going. Pittsburgh takes this one. Okay, next up, we've got Atlanta Falcons versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. My expectations are starting to drop for Matt Ryan. I mean, in games where he's supposed to take care of business, he typically hasn't, and it's fallen on the shoulders of the defense to bail him out. But going up against the Buccaneers, I expect Atlanta to roll. Who to start? Devontae Freeman, every week. Julio Jones, every week. Leonard Hankerson is out. I don't like Roddy White, so a sneaky start will be Justin Hardy, who's getting his first action this week. Justin Hardy, waiver wire addition. Atlanta's defense also might be a sneaky start because they've played pretty much over their heads all season and could do the same against rookie quarterback Jameis Winston. Tampa Bay, start Mike Evans. Mike Evans is going to be a juggernaut in fantasy for as long as Vincent Jackson is out, Lewis Murphy is out. So Mike Evans, definite start. Doug Martin, no brainer. Start Doug Martin. That's it. Okay, so the Sunday night game. Two undefeated teams clash. Green Bay versus the Denver Broncos. Finally, Denver is going to lose. This is not an upset, but it's going to be an L. Two great defenses. So it's going to come down to who makes more plays, Aaron Rodgers or Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning's regressing, so of course I'm going to choose Aaron Rodgers. But expect this to be a struggle. Who do I like? I mean, you've got to start all your usual suspects. You've got to start Aaron Rodgers. You've got to start Randall Cobb. You've got to start James Jones. A sneaky start may be Devontae Adams because someone's going to draw the matchup against Aqib Talib, probably James Jones. Someone's going to draw the matchup between Chris Harris Jr., probably Randall Cobb, which leaves Devontae Adams with signal coverage. Maybe a sneaky start. The running backs, I mean, is Eddie Lacy healthy? I don't know. Is James Starks running back number one in Green Bay? I'm not sure. There's too many questions in that backfield for me to trust any one of those running backs. If you have Eddie Lacy, you're kind of forced to start him, seeing that he's probably your number one back. On the other side, you have to start your Demaryius Thomas. You have to start Emmanuel Sanders. I don't trust any Denver running back. I don't believe in this. Ronnie Hillman is now the starter. C.J. Anderson is now giving him relief. It's not safe to start either of your running backs. And to be honest with you, it's probably not safe to start your Denver or your Green Bay defense because this could be a shootout. Okay, so we've got the Monday night action. Indianapolis Colts versus the Carolina Panthers. I think Cam Newton rolls on to stay undefeated. I think Jonathan Stewart runs laps around the Indianapolis defense, who suffered at the hands of LeGarrette Blount not too long ago. Similar runners. Greg Olsen, of course, is an every week start, seeing that he is Cam Newton's best weapon. And of course, Cam Newton is an every week starter. If you have Andrew Luck, you've got to start him. I expect him to struggle early against a great Carolina defense, but as Andrew Luck has done in previous weeks, he's been a garbage time maestro. Probably going to edge out 300 yards, probably going to eke out 2 touchdowns. Don't like Frank Gore going up against the Carolina defense. I have him on my team, I have him on my bench for a reason. T.Y. draws a pretty hard matchup against the Carolina secondary. So, who to start? Gotta start Luck. Gotta start T.Y. if you have him because he's probably your wide receiver 1. I think Dante Moncrief might outshine him though, seeing that he'll have a lesser corner. But Carolina, of course, will win this game. Okay, for this last segment, I want to get some Twitter start or sit questions out of the way. So, first up, at Anth Cardella, Ladarius Green or Gary Barnidge? So, Ladarius Green and the San Diego Chargers are going up against a pretty suspect Baltimore defense who's given up a lot of points, even given up points to Colin Kaepernick. Wow, first Colin Kaepernick reference on this show. Gary Barnidge is going to go up against a pretty great Arizona defense with a pretty great secondary. This goes against all logic, but I think Gary Barnidge is the better start. In recent history, we've seen Phillip Rivers spread the wealth very thinly. We've seen him throw to all of the receivers on his roster, all of their running backs on his roster. So I think that there's far too many options on the San Diego team to trust anyone at any given time. Like, you can only start Keenan Allen for sure every week. And when Antonio Gates is healthy, you can start him every week. And you can trust the Danny Woodhead. Outside of that, it's really a crapshoot as to who that fourth person in line to receive any amount of Phillip Rivers' 500 yards is going to be. Now, on the other side of things, when you're looking at the Cleveland Browns offense, Gary Barnidge and Travis Benjamin are the two biggest beneficiaries of that offense. And Gary Barnidge, bar none, is their best red zone threat. So if ever Cleveland gets to the red zone against Arizona's defense, look for Gary Barnidge to score. I think Gary Barnidge is going to be given far more opportunities than Ladarius Green. So I think that Gary Barnidge is the better start. So next up, at Andrew Turner 09, John Brown or Jeremy Hill. This one's a no-brainer. Start John Brown. John Brown is starting to enter wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside territory. He is one of Carson Palmer's, if not Carson Palmer's favorite target. And he's going up against a very suspect Browns secondary, with or without, who knows, the services of Joe Hayden. Jeremy Hill goes up against a pretty stingy Steelers front seven. We know Jeremy Hill is a between the tackles sort of runner, and the best way to run against the Pittsburgh Steelers is to get to the edge. Jeremy Hill goes north-south. The way to run against Pittsburgh is east to west. So to me, this is a no-brainer. Fire up John Brown. Thank me later. Okay. At Maurice K. 1971. Start 1. Eddie Lacy, T.Y. Hilton, Ronnie Hillman. Eddie Lacy is going to draw the best defense he's seen thus far this season, and we don't know if he's healthy. Goes up against the Denver defense. T.Y. Hilton is going up against a pretty stingy Carolina defense, and he draws their best cornerback. Or you've got Ronnie Hillman, who goes up against Green Bay's defense, quarterbacked by Clay Matthews in the middle. Who's the best start here? God, you're really in a bad position, first of all, Maurice. But I like T.Y. Hilton. That hurts to say, too, because these are some pretty bad options, just given their matchups. Any other week, you have some decent upside outside of Ronnie Hillman. But I think T.Y. Hilton is your best option here. He's Andrew Luck's favorite target, and he's going to look for him regardless of his coverage. Andrew Luck is a pretty capable quarterback, at least in his mind. And he's going to look for his favorite receiver, T.Y. Hilton. So, especially if you're in PPR, even if he's got to force it to T.Y. early, maybe some bubble screens, he's going to get some receptions. I trust T.Y. better than I do either of your running backs. Start T.Y. Next up, we have at HLR_38. Start Mike Wallace or Michael Floyd. I think this one's a no-brainer. Start Michael Floyd. Carson Palmer is going to have a field day against a suspect Baltimore defense. And yeah, I like Michael Floyd, even being the third option on a passing attack that throws generally around 60 to 65% of the time. Much more than I trust Mike Wallace, who's on a Minnesota team whose MO is to get Adrian Peterson going on the ground. They probably throw the ball 30-35% of the time. And Mike Wallace isn't even the top option. It's Stephon Diggs. Mike Wallace only has value when he breaks off a big run. And those big runs are becoming few and far between. So Michael Floyd is the no-brainer in this situation. Start Michael Floyd. Okay, so next we've got at Ricardo Middleton. Yes, I'm answering my own starter sit Frank Gore or Darren McFadden. Frank Gore going up against a pretty stout run defense in Carolina. Darren McFadden going up against a pretty stout run defense in the Seattle Seahawks. I'm rolling with Darren McFadden. Had the hot hand last week, trotting for 152 yards, and I think he picks up where he left off. Seattle's given up a lot of rush yards in recent memory, especially to Jonathan Stewart, and I think the Cowboys' offensive line should create some pretty decent holes for Darren McFadden to run through. I also think Darren McFadden will play a big role in the receiving game with Des Bryant opening up the field. Frank Gore, I just can't trust against a run defense that has Luke Kuechly and Smith Sr. in the middle. So that's it for this week, sports fans. Make those moves before the November 3rd trade deadline. Play the waiver. Safe picks. See you next week.